Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today, we're going to be talking about the newest album from Miguel, titled Wildheart. So one of the biggest journeys that I've taken throughout the creation of this whole thing is through modern R&B. I didn't really used to care for the genre all that much a couple of years back, but I found myself really coming to love more and more of it as time's passed and I've heard more. And one of the artists that I've always found myself a little bit fascinated with along the way is Frank Ocean. Oh wait, I'm sorry, I'm talking about Miguel. Okay, what I just did might not seem to make a lot of sense, but it's representative of what the mainstream has done with Miguel, and it's bizarre how much he seems to be overlooked in terms of hype and critical success. Maybe it was just bad timing. For as colorful and genuinely fun as his album Kaleidoscope Dream was in 2012, it was unfortunately overshadowed by Frank Ocean's Channel Orange, and everybody seemed to forget that Miguel existed beyond Adorn and a few guest spots. And while I'm not gonna say that Kaleidoscope Dream was better than Channel Orange, being honest with you all, it's not. I've always felt that he's a bit of an underrated R&B star in the indie scene and especially in the mainstream. I mean, come on. Was it just a chance collaboration with Ariana Grande that allowed The Weeknd nearly a half dozen top 40 spots, while Miguel also struggled to even get one or two? But you know what, in a way it does make a sort of twisted sense, because as a composer, Miguel's kind of weird. Lyrically doesn't often stray from your typical R&B territory, arguably the biggest facet that held him back from challenging Frank Ocean in 2012, but his personality and sound are much more eclectic, bleeding across genres in a way that reminds me more of Prince than most modern R&B histrionics. But the element that crept up on me the most about Miguel is an understated charisma that's genuinely charming. He's often just as explicit as many of his peers, but he makes it all sound fun and effortless, and he's got some class about it too. Now, as I said, I didn't always love Kaleidoscope Dream, mostly because the lyrics occasionally got silly and the production was a little overdone at points. Okay, a lot overdone at points, not confident enough to let Miguel coast by in a great groove, and that was a problem. But as I said in the last episode of Billboard Breakdown, the lead-off single from that album, Coffee, for Wildheart, he really got me excited for this album. So, how'd it turn out? Well, it's certainly interesting, that's for damn sure. If I thought that Kaleidoscope Dream was colorful in its choice of instrumentation and production, Wildheart is even more varied, pushing the Prince comparison even more starkly to the forefront, as it leaps across funk, indie R&B, hip-hop, and even fringes of psychedelic rock, glam rock, and surf rock. In other words, Wildheart takes a lot more chances with its instrumentation and its style, trying to recreate a smoky, drugged-out, and slightly modernized Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, and unfortunately it doesn't always stick the landing. This is one of the albums where the highs are absolutely excellent, but the lows unfortunately are pretty hard to swallow, which ultimately means that it doesn't exactly rise above Kaleidoscope Dream, even though I would argue there are more standout tracks on this album, just unfortunately counterbalanced by some much weaker songs. So let's start with Miguel himself. The primary reason why you all should be listening to this album. I can't lie, a record this eclectic would not function if you didn't have a singer with the frankly shocking range that Miguel shows on this album, and I mean both emotional and vocal. Sure, there's more fuzziness and reverb on his vocal production than I usually prefer, but that doesn't take away from his intensity, his passion, and his jaw-dropping falsetto. I mean, holy god! He's got the killer charisma to make it all look easy too, and you can believe in everything that he says, especially when he gets to some of the kinkier songs like The Valley or Flesh. There's an earnestness and reality behind his delivery that no matter how sexual this album gets, and it does get sexual, it's coming from a real organic place that you can buy. And primarily this is all his affair too, and even despite the thicker, heavier sounds that might feel bigger in the mix, it feels strikingly intimate and dense, with the only guest star being Kurrupt, whose laid-back sleaze on NWA adds a more modern West Coast flavor to the track that goes down incredibly well, especially when you consider what the rest of this album was trying to do. But we have to talk about the instrumentation and the production, where the biggest highs and the biggest lows ultimately occur. The first thing you will notice and will draw a lot of attention are the guitars. They're dense, they drive heavier grooves, they got a fair amount of distortion thickening the atmosphere. I might not love the first track, A Beautiful Exit, but that's more because of the underwritten lyrics than the tense guitar line or the frantic cymbals. And really, when this album is at its best is when it can build off of and coast on that groove. I already talked about how great Coffee can work off of a great textured bass and murky guitar rollick and razor sharp percussion, but NWA takes the rattling percussion and what I think is a cowbell and pairs it with a simmering guitar line that balances against one of the few good synthesizer lines on the entire album. Waves has this breezy brand of lo-fi funk and surf rock that's destined to become the hipster song of the summer. Hollywood Dreams is a guitar line that feels pulled straight out of 70s Bowie with a blatant lyrical lift from Heroes. Going to Hell opens up with a motorcycle revving before breaking into this noisy, rattling psychedelic riff that's then paired with these distorted synth arpeggios and a guitar solo that sounds pretty damn good. Leaves is anchored in a simmering guitar riff that almost reminds me of Lazy Eye by Silver works on pickups of all things, and Face the Sun just outright gets Lenny Kravitz for its hazy fire, as if this album wasn't soaked in California enough already. And you know, if it just stuck with all these all the way through, this album could have been spectacular. But you know what? There's no way to get around it. Most of the synth and keyboard lines, they don't belong here. They've got no place on this album. I get going for left field. Hell, if you're looking at R&B over the past 3 to 5 years, this entire album is left field. But the tones chosen just don't work. Deal opens up with this windswept guitar roll before switching beats and tempos into this overmixed mess of a track, and the spacey synth flutters are the biggest factor to why it doesn't fit. Destinado Amor actually has a ton of menace in the bass and the low-end synth, especially over the chorus, but that synth oscillation that's higher is way too lightweight and spoils an otherwise good song. And that's not counting the points where this album just gets weird for no discernible reason, like on The Valley. The pummeling bass, that warped low-end synth, the sandy hand claps, the blubbery chiptune. It sounds like something that Death Grips might have made mid in their period around Government Plates, an impression that's only further intensified by the noisy, warped tones of Flesh that certainly creates a more believable BDSM-inspired song than anything The Weeknd has ever done, but it's nowhere near as tight, and the dank, abortive guitar line does not help it. I want to like this song a lot more than I do. And on that note, let's talk about lyrics and themes, and the other area where Miguel can kind of struggle. His poetry isn't so much designed to tell stories so much as set the mood, which is fine, and to his credit, he's pretty damn good at doing that. Hell, this entire album is grounded into a mood that I can really like, but the text itself doesn't really give me a lot to work with beyond conventional R&B. But then again, that kind of makes sense. This is an album that's trying to evoke images of classic, oversaturated LA escapism, full of bikers, strippers, the surf, tons of drugs, and yet for as much as Miguel invests in all the iconography, it feels like he's grabbing for an image that constantly slides out of his grasp, or he becomes too heady and becomes intoxicated in it. And I mean that as a compliment. The heady rush of seeking out those Hollywood dreams and finding one's true love and the whole debauchery and rising above it is where this album finds its most momentum and its strongest dramatic pathos. It might be cliche, sure, but Miguel's got the skill to make it look very attractive, which is all you need here. But we don't really get a defined picture of Miguel's his own place in it beyond songs like What's Normal Anyway, where I like the sentiment, but the execution of it's kind of clumsy and simplistic. We get the outline of the story, we get the great color and atmosphere that would fill in that story, but I find myself hunting for the lyrical moments that would push it over the top in the best way with memorable lines, or would crystallize themes beyond cliches, and this album doesn't really take that step or enough of it. And also, GFG does not belong at the end of this album. It's a tonal whiplash from Face the Sun, honestly doesn't fit, it could have been cut, it's a real downer for how the rest of this album should have flowed out. In short, this record would make for a great soundtrack to a trashy sort of LA-inspired fame movie like Beyond the Valley of the Dolls, but it doesn't quite get there on its own. I love the mood and a ton of the instrumentation and ideas of Wildheart, and Miguel is a great presence behind the microphone, but beyond that, this album feels kind of insubstantial. It's got some great highs, fantastic atmosphere, but how long those highs last, very different question. In other words, it's the R&B album of the summer, for better or for worse. But for me, it's more of the better, as it's a very strong 7 out of 10 and definitely a recommendation if you're looking for a very interesting R&B album. But I still think Miguel's got a genuine classic in him that we haven't quite seen yet. All I hope he does is that he flushes out the sounds that he started on this album, because to see R&B bringing in more guitars like this, that's only a good thing. I want to see more. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Just a friendly reminder that on July 10th, I'm going to be reviewing an album from 2014 that you guys suggest. So leave your comments tagged as 2014 below. Might have been an album I've already covered, or maybe one that I might have missed somewhere along the way, but leave the comments and the one that gets the most will be the one that I cover. Fair warning, there's one pretty far out in front, and that one's gonna have it unless you get a big seismic shift in the other direction. Also, if you spam my comments, I will know. I've been tracking. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.